Hey everyone, I'm super excited to offer you something a little bit different on this podcast episode and something we have not talked about. And these are memoirs. And I'd love to welcome Sue Camaione to the show today.
Thank you, Heike. I'm really pressed and happy to be here.
Super awesome. And if you guys, or when you guys look at the video of the interview, you'll see this in the background. Sue has a set of drums behind her amongst all her plants. It's really, really cute. And we may get to that as well. But let's start off right away with give us an example of when you ignited your spark, Sue.
I think the most recent probably was in the last 8 years was when I started doing storytelling competitions, and I was done on a lark. I was supporting a couple friends who do stand-up comedy, including my now husband. I just got married last year. And I went there, and at the end of the storytelling competition, someone said, "Is there anyone else who would like to give it a shot?" So I got up and told a story that I had told a friend of mine in a car where he almost drove off the road laughing. So I thought, well, it'll be a good story. So I told the story, and I was hooked. I won second prize, and I did three more prizes that ended up in the book, actually.
So what was the story? I mean, you said, "Oh, I told them the story." What was the story? We want to know.
The story was in the chapter that I can't remember the title of the chapter at the moment, but it was when I was first working at a newspaper desk when I was only 18 years old. And unfortunately, I was very poor and I barely had enough money to eat. And I ran out the back door and ran directly into the managing editor and the copy desk editor, the lead editor in Brace. She was pregnant. He was married to someone else. She was married to someone else. Long story short, I was totally terrified that I was going to lose my job because I thought I was going to starve to death. But I had friends who were reporters who were in their 30s, so they were older, they were wiser, and they sat me down and said, "Well, if this happens, calm down. You're not going to lose your job. You have the power." Which at 18, I thought I don't have the power. He's going to fire me. And sure enough, he called me and said that I wasn't coming up to snuff, and I hadn't done my research, writing obits of all things. And instead of for
What
some
are wait. What are obits?
Obits are obituaries. That's the old-fashioned term that back when they had newspapers, obituaries. So when you were a young writer, you would start out writing obituaries because you do the research, you talk to the family, and then you write this little couple paragraphs about what a wonderful father this man was, that kind of thing. So you can't fail at it, basically. It's very difficult to fail at. So I knew I wasn't doing a bad job with that. So I took a deep breath, and for some reason something kicked in, and I thought, I'm going to fight this man at the age of 18. And I said, no, you're not going to fire me, but you're going to give me a raise. He hung up the phone, and I thought, I lost my job. It's no matter what. And I thought, I don't care. I'm coming to work anyway. So I came to work, and he ended up throwing an envelope in front of me, and I took it to the bathroom, opened it up, and sure enough, I had a raise. At that time, I was making $1.85. That's how long ago it was.
Right.
I was raised to 225. Unfortunately, the librarian for the newspaper was right next to me. It used to be the fact checker, and she was outraged because she was only making 220 an hour after 10 years at the newspaper. So she assumed that I was somehow in cahoots with this managing editor who was having an affair. I was a little terrified that she would think it was me. And then finally she said, "I know the reason." And I said, "And what is it?" And she said, "Because you have big boobs." And I said, "That's the reason. Let's go with that." So, and that was I told that story. It was about a 5, 6 minute story. And that was the one that got me kind of a little hooked on storytelling.
So, guys, you hear that Sue is a writer. So, we haven't asked her exactly what she's doing, but she's here with her book, The Practical Seductress and How I Learned to Take My Hat and Run. And that's how we met. She sent me her book, and I thought it would be a wonderful topic to bring her on the show, not only talk about her book and her memoir, but what really is deep down in the book as far as we women are concerned. But before I ask you the next question, tell us a little bit more about the background that got you to where you are now, where you're writing the book or wrote the book.
Well, I had stacks and stacks and boxes of journals that actually went back as far as my childhood. And after going, I thought, it was in the midst of COVID. I was only working on a part-time schedule as the mentor and trainer for healthcare researchers and business development capture at one of the contracts in here, contract companies here in the Washington, D.C. area. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with my other 4 or 5 hours of free time? And so I looked through all my journals and I started, tagging things and trying to find what was going on. And I just started writing a memoir from there. I didn't know it was a memoir. I was just writing stories to myself. I didn't know who was going to read it, who was going to want to read it. I've done a lot of writing in my life, but it's almost all nonfiction and writing for government agencies. So this was sort of a little bit on the storytelling side. I wanted to be not just my life, but a story about what was this about. So after writing 140,000 words, I couldn't figure out what this was about. I had to go through the whole thing again. To make a long story short, I ended up with 78,000 words, and the clear theme that kept arising throughout my life, which guided my life and challenged my life, and many, many other women, is the sexual double standard in a world where men can seek adventure, but women find shame, all in the pursuit of pleasure. And that theme, once I had that theme, I cut out the other 80,000 words, and it was a lot easier to become an actual story and to understand, what was your life purpose. And as you get older, if you have over the age of 56 years old, you start wondering, what is my legacy? What am I leaving behind? And really, it's more of understanding who you are, what you stood for, and what it might mean. I didn't think it was going to mean anything to anyone else at the time I wrote it, though.
Very interesting because many women hit midlife over 50 and feel like they lost their spark. It's like my brand is all about pursuing your spark. What's one shift that can help them reignite that sense of excitement and possibilities in their lives?
I think a lot of women are going through. I got divorced in my mid 50s, and I think part of the issue is we have stereotypes from our childhood that say, you're over an age. I remember telling my mother at one point when I was in my 40s, I'm going to get a divorce. I need to get a divorce for many reasons. And she sat me down, she sighed, and she said, oh, now you're over the age of 40, no man will want you. And luckily I had a sister who was sitting next to me listening to this tale, and she said, Ma, she didn't say that. She has too many men in her life. That's the problem. So but it still kind of sticks with you, when you start dating and you start going out there, you're thinking, okay, nobody's, and sure enough, the first few times I put anything on an app, with somebody much older, and it's just like, what is going on here? So I took my date of birth off of it for one thing, but I think those things keep us down. And I ended up going into, I said, what is it I love? What's joy? What brings my, to me, movement is joy. And so what I love the most is dancing. So I thought, well, you know what? I've always danced my whole life. I'm going to seriously, start grabbing all my friends, and we're going to learn salsa dancing and swing dancing at Glen Echo, and you name it. We tried everything. So we're not very good at any of it, but we did try dancing. And I became renowned for having dance parties with 40, 50 people to show up. So
Well, there you go. That's where the fun is at. And I just want to also intertwine that when you're listening to Sue talking, a lot of the things are in her book. Because I did read her book from cover to cover. And so the questions are around the book, but also about our sexuality and exactly what she said that men go get away and like, everything's great. And I totally agree with what you just said about the good girl syndrome, we're raised in a certain way. We're here to be polite, accommodating, and not too much of anything. We're supposed to be quiet and laying low. So a party with 50 people is definitely not laying low. But how do we learn? How do we learn those messages and step into our power without fear and judgment?
well, I don't know. With me, it was many, many years of different therapeutic modalities, including psychedelic therapy. So I tried
Whatever it
everything under the
takes.
sun.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah, I think I've always had very strong friends, either strong girlfriends or two of my closest friends are male gay friends. And I don't think I could do anything without, I actually had once I was divorced, I didn't have a divorce party. I had a gratitude party, and I invited all the people who supported me over the years with me, basically telling me, you're fine, you'll get along, you're a fighter, no problem. I had one friend actually take me out, and as he was going from place to place, we were in a shopping mall. He was going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I turned around. I said to him, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm counting," because I was whining about, oh my, you know what, now am I gonna, how I'm gonna find anybody today who's gonna want me, blah, blah. He said, "I'm counting the number of men who open the doors for you, and you don't even notice." But he says you do because you take a step back and go, "Oh, thank you," as if it had never happened just 5 minutes ago. And so he kind of slapped me around, right? And kind of a little bit of a wake up call, like, stop the pity party. You have
Yeah.
more to associate with the rest of the world than most people do. And I realize, and it's true, certainly there's a certain amount of luck of your personality and your drive and your level of energy. But I've also a vegetarian my whole life, and I work out for almost an hour a day. So I think those things kept me going. And I noticed that whenever I'm in turmoil, I will go back to the gym or back to a class or just start dancing, whatever I can do. Even during COVID, I had a Friday afternoon dance group that I had done on Zoom with a number of friends. We sit down with a glass of wine and talk after. But well, so any calories we lost, we put back in.
But you think about it, so dancing and exercising are good ways to, like I said, step into your power and own your power. Because when it comes back to when we're talking about the stories in your book, many women are so hesitant to own their desires because of the fear of being judged. It's like you said, oh, I had a party with 50 people, and you're like, yeah, whatever. But when we're talking about desires and the fear of being judged, how do we push past that? And how do we live unapologetically and say, well, like you said, well, I just do it? Because a lot of women don't.
I was also very lucky, though, that my parents were very young. They were teenagers when they had me, and they were very progressive. And my grandmother was a suffragette, and she was also very progressive. So, to a certain extent, despite the fact that I was running into these social restrictions, I had this background. And the other thing that was very lucky for me was I was almost 16 years old before I was developed and it went to the age of menarche. So I had a chance to develop a sort of a kind of caustic, snarky personality that overcame a lot of issues and difficulties that younger girls in my cohort were going through, and I wasn't because I was looked like a 12-year-old boy until I was, almost 16, and then suddenly I became, developed into Marilyn Monroe body. So it was a little bit of a shock to myself and to everyone around me, including men who did not even recognize me on the street anymore.
Well, that's when we all start to bloom, right? But when it comes to desires now, so we're imagining now at our age, I'm 63. I don't know how old you are,
Older.
but we have desires. So how do we embrace these desires now? What do we do?
I think they did a survey, I can't remember, believe it, maybe it was MIT, where they did ask women how they felt at the age of menopause. And they were very shocked. The male researchers were shocked, the female ones weren't, that women were having a much better sex life in their 50s and 60s than they had ever had before. And they across the board asked, why is that? Then they said, well, they had more free, they felt open to use toys and lubrication and all kinds of things. But the main reason which shocked the researchers, is I don't have to worry about getting pregnant anymore. I can do whatever I want. So I thought, well, that's actually a pretty good reason to suddenly feel free. So,
And it's also when you think back in the days before we were all much more liberated than we're now, and where women have kids by themselves and they don't have a partner, husband, or whatever. And they're just like, I just want to be a mom, and how liberating that is now. But back in the days, I remember when I got pregnant with my first child when I was 27. And I had no contraception. I was like, this is all going to be great. This is going to work out. I will never get pregnant. And boom, of course, so much for safe sex. I got pregnant. And my thing, and that's not that long ago, I was thinking, I don't want to be a single mom. I don't want to just, be responsible for this whole thing. We got pregnant. We're gonna marry, and this is how it's going to be. The old role model of womanhood. So meet a guy, get pregnant, get married, live happily for as long, however long you live with that person. But as that has changed so much, and I agree with what you said, is that we we become more liberated in the sense that the pill helped us be more liberated. And also society is way more open to women that want just a child and nothing else, or let's backtrack a little bit, who just want to have pleasure. What do you
Very
think?
well. Most of us were raised, and even including my kids, were raised in an era of sex education being about pain, death, pregnancy, everything that could possibly, infections, everything that can go wrong. Very little, zero to, pleasure, how a woman even has pleasure, which is, I had a couple of men who read my book who sent me comments saying, I think every man should read this because then they'll at least know where the body parts are. So
That's very true.
and I think a lot of women don't even know. I've had the situation where I had a sister-in-law who is a lovely, lovely person. She's no longer with us, unfortunately. But she had not had an orgasm until she found a lover at the age of 42 after she had been married and had 3 kids. And I do remember her calling me at it was 4 o'clock in the morning Arizona time and 7 o'clock my time. And the first thing she said was, "Now I get your jokes." So because and then she proceeded to tell me that she had her first orgasm. So,
Hmm.
but I think
Hmm.
we still see that, particularly people who are born in very religious or very socially restricted backgrounds, or in neighborhoods that you did not allow. I was also lucky because my grandmother was divorced, one of the only divorced women around, and she would not allow anyone to put her or anyone else down in her presence. She was an unusual woman. She had gone to Cornell University back in the day when women didn't even go. She was arrested as a suffragette because she was driving a car, and the reason they arrested her because she was a distraction to the other male drivers. So,
Now, that's a good story.
and I do dedicate my memoir to her. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. You do. And also, you describe your own sexual encounter with an orgasm and how that was for you. Uh, so we told you the title. It's The Practical Seductress. And so we're diving also into more practical things here at this, in this interview. So when your book redefines seduction beyond relationships, how can women use seduction as a form of self-expression, leadership, or confidence?
I think the first thing is to seduce yourself. And I think it would
Explain.
be, I think women, probably at any age, but particularly when they're younger, you need to educate yourself on who you are, which parts, what you're handicapping men if you're cisgender, and even if you're lesbian, you would be handicapping yourself and your partner if you don't know what you find pleasurable. And you have to give yourself that okay to even try and experiment a little bit. And many, many years ago, I don't know, I'm old enough to remember President Carter. Jocelyn Elders was the Surgeon General at that time. And she said that they were having an epidemic of teenage pregnancies. And she said that it would be good to teach masturbation and sex ed class, and all, what broke loose. But I actually know what she was talking about, because boys don't have to learn this. Girls do. I was at a dinner party recently where the question was, when did you lose your virginity? Because they talked about my book, and I have a chapter called The Frustrated Virgin, where I lose my virginity and end up getting broke, homeless, and everything else. But all of the men said, oh, 16, 17, 18, whatever. And the women said, 19, 20, 21, whatever. And then I said, when did you have your first orgasm? And
Hmm.
the men said, you just asked us when we lost our virginity. And the women said, oh, yeah, I was 23. Oh, no, I was 26. Oh, no, I was almost 30. And the men were like, what are you talking about? And we had to explain what was going on. And I think I see there's more openness now with the body positivity movement. I have a 35 and a 38-year-old. They have a very different way of looking at gender fluidity that I think
Hmm.
our generation is not. I think it's just to embrace the feeling and the understanding that pleasure is not a horrible thing. If you feel joy, desire, that should be part of being a healthy life. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy, the original one, he has on the very bottom level of that is just is food, water, air, but also sex. And I think, and of course, he got into deep trouble for that. But I think um, we tend to forget that we're mammals first, and then women.
Oh, you mean that's why I like to cuddle with my husband?
Exactly, because you get that oxytocin rising is better than anything else.
Yeah, I can see that as we're getting to know ourselves and our needs more, that this also translates into our confidence, that we're not like not educated, that we don't know how to get an orgasm, we don't know what our body parts are called, and how sex happens. And I'm really surprised at your dinner party about what the men said, weren't you?
I was, which is why one of the men who read my book and said this should be given to every man, every heterosexual man on the planet. Um, but at the same time, I think that they may have been fooled. Like one man said, but I had this woman, I was with this woman for 3 years, and she's always said she had an orgasm, and it wasn't until much later that I learned she hadn't, because she faked it with me, or she'd say, yes, I did. It wasn't until someone actually had an orgasm with him that he realized, wow, what that wasn't fun. And I think for men, it's not, it's a lot more, again, we're talking heterosexual men. It's a
Yeah.
lot more fun to watch a woman in the throes, and then you feel like, oh, look what I did. So than it is not, so it does benefits men and women. I think the patriarchal, sort of that puritanical look at how women are, it's also a disadvantage for men too. I think a lot of men have also suffered as much as women have under the same system. So
Yeah, but I think what you just said, I have to say, I disagree a little bit when you said, oh, look what I've done. Now she has an orgasm. Pat yourself on the back for a job well done. I disagree with that. I'm like, come on now, everybody take responsibility and actually have communication about what things
yeah.
feel, right? What we cannot expect. I remember a story from somebody who said to me at one point, "Oh, my girlfriend had 100 orgasms in the last hour." I'm like, "Yeah, show me a woman who does that. 100, really?" And he was convinced it was 100 orgasms. I'm like, "Nah, nah, she would be exhausted." But it's like I think we need, and that's what your book is all about too. Is uh, we we are told that we still need to be modest. We oftentimes what's the word I want to use? That we need to accept what is given to us without question and celebrate the desires that we have or that we're given instead of owning them ourselves. And how do we unlearn this this shame or even the fear of reclaiming the pleasure?
And I did not shy from the fact that many times when I was seeking pleasure, I was punished in the book. And
Tell us a story. Tell
yeah,
us a story.
well, probably the first one that comes to mind is I was 19 and everybody else had lost their virginity except me. Even my mother had me at the age of about 19. So even my own mother beat me at the pool. So I was looking, and I was a biology student at the time, and I was dissecting animals, and I smelled like formaldehyde for a year. So there was a reason not to be dating. Finally, I cleared up and I smelled better, and I was asking my roommate, how do I get laid essentially? And she gave me some lessons, and it was during the time of Cosmo and Helen Gurley Brown, and it was all based on how to find the right guy and sexual desire and so on. So I was thinking I'm really missing out on something. And I finally found a target or a mark, and it seemed like a sweet guy, and I was working in a nursing home with him, and so I sort of tackled him in the whirlpool room and set up a time to de-virginize myself, because I was thinking, whatever this is, I gotta get rid of it because it's not helping me at all. So it's basically being a virgin is a lack of knowledge. So he came to my dorm room, and he had a lot of difficulties getting his key in the passage to my female channel, so to speak. And at one point, it just the whole thing, as someone who's looking at like a field biologist looking at male is now attempting to courtship with female, And I was just watching him, and for some reason, I thought the whole thing was hysterically funny, and I started laughing, and then he was fine. And
Mhm.
afterwards, I said, "Oh, well, did I fail to mention I'm a virgin?" He's like, "Yeah, well, that would have been good to know." Towards the end, I end up with someone tattling on me, because and back in those days, you weren't supposed to have men in your room, and I was summarily kicked out of my dorm. I had no place to go. I had no money. I ended up having bronchitis at the time, and he this man set me up in an apartment, a rat trap tenement, studio that was, rat feces on the floor and so on, and kind of left me there coughing and my bronchitis. And in the meantime, I sort of had to leave without anything, just what the little few things I had with me, and realizing that as he was walking out the door, that he was still married, which he failed to mention. So he was going back to his wife. I was sitting there in poverty, wondering if I was going to even live through the experience. And I do remember opening, closing the door, and realizing that I was closing the door on my own innocence. So yeah, it ended up better. The second time was better.
Yeah, but I read this in your book, and I know what other stories, but we're not going to tell them because we want everybody to read the book. Um, is it's really impactful. It's the whole way you described it was so became very personal in the book, very thought-provoking. I'm thinking, how many, did something like this happen in my life somewhere remotely, or how did I react when this something similar happened to me, even though my story are very different to compared to what you're experienced. But it's like the underlying message still at this point is I haven't taken control of my life. I let others rule not only my virginity and my sex life. I'm standing there and I'm receiving and I'm taking what's given to me instead of stepping up in my own power and saying, no, I know what to do. And with that comes strength. And you've developed incredible amount of strength that I followed through your book when um when we're stringing the stories together of how your life developed and the relationships you have. But when I think of my listeners, what do you say to the woman who fears what others, her partner, her friends, or even a stranger might think if she starts embracing her sensuality and the power that comes with it?
That's a good question because I do know people who will remain married in very sexless marriages out of fear. Um, and I think part of that is the fear of rejection. And we live in a society where women are very much judged constantly.
Mhm.
So if there's a way you can kind of get over the judgment, I think that would help. And having close friends was the best thing for me,
Yeah.
because they're your biggest boosters and vice versa. And I think what surprises me though is that how many younger women have identified with this tale, because many things that I've lived through, you've lived through, I thought had somewhat become passé, and in fact, it hasn't. And as a matter of fact, many of them were probably in the worst situation because they thought they were supposed to be casual, and what was missing in their lives, and also many men's lives, is the intimacy and the connection and feeling accepted. So part of that has to be you looking at yourself and saying, okay, I don't look this great, I'm playing soccer with my boobs nowadays, whatever, is happening in my body, but I still accept who I am in order to be able to, move forward, to live with, be with, or even have a sensual relationship with anyone else. And it's not just sex. To me, it's like sensuality is far more
Yeah.
important than sexuality in some ways. Yeah.
I think the sex comes when you're sensual, when you're connected, when things just jive and you're like, yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah.
Um, but the fear is definitely something, and you just I think the fear with the description in that story you just mentioned in your book, where you were sick in a room alone, rat infested, no money, left behind. I think that so many women, in one way or another, if they're in relationships that are not healthy and not balanced, still fear that it's there for them. And what would you say, based on your experience with that kind of fear? What are steps that you took that helped you?
It's hard to say because you got to go back to your youth. I think, unfortunately, it's really basic personality. There's something in my personality, which is a bit of a fighter, which is what the man says when he left. He says, "You'll be fine. You're a fighter." And so, despite what else he had done to me, I was thinking, I kind of am. And I think that was what helped get from point A to point B to point Z kind of thing. And I've also been a very big believer because I'm the oldest of four and I took care of my siblings and I was afraid to leave them when I went to college. I'm sort of a protector of sorts. I take care of others, but not in that I'm a nurse teacher kind of way, but sort of the I'll stand up to any bully to protect the people I love. And I think that key part of my personality, and also having been a tomboy until I was 16, was a very, it was. I can't imagine how lucky I was that that happened. At the time, it didn't seem lucky, but but now I realize that being able to develop my personality and to have some strength and fortitude before I changed into a woman was a huge benefit. And unfortunately, young women nowadays, the age of menarche is younger and younger and younger, and it's getting more and more difficult for them to be able to develop a strength of feeling this is who I am, and before they get the onslaught of the double standard that's thrown at them in every
Yeah.
life. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. And I see that too with a lot of women. That exactly what the example is like. They're getting younger, they're getting more dependent, they're more like, I need to be in a relationship. And then they're stuck. And then it's all hell breaks loose. But in your book, you dive, and we touched on that just a little bit, into the sexual double standards and its lingering effects of it. Why do you think this message is especially relevant for women today?
Today, I
To
think it burst forth with the hashtag Me Too movement. I
Mhm.
had been in a DC professional women's group, and I was probably 20 more years older than everybody in that group. And I told the story, which is in the book called Sitting with Scissors, where I took care of the sexual harassment in a sort of old school fashion. He was a very big, burly kind of cowboy type, and I was using big industrial scissors to cut up galley proofs at the time they were called. And I had turned around when he came very close to me with his belt right near my face and just used my scissors to point it exactly where it needed to be. And he guy jumped back, a little frightened, but called me a B word and everything else. But I was telling that story in a kind of humorous fashion, and we put it into the presentation because we were talking about what to do about sexual harassment in the workplace. And
Mhm.
I had two of those women come to my book launch and they read the chapter Sitting with Scissors, and they said they were blown away because I had told the story very short in a very comical way. And they thought, oh, she's fine, everything's taken care of. She didn't really go through anything bad because, that's Sue. And they said when they read the chapter, they both were just, wow, you really did go through things in those days, things that even now you wouldn't be allowed to without being reported to, HR. But
HR.
nonetheless, one of them had gone through a similar situation, and the guy was fired, but because he had harassed like four other women, he was a serial harasser. You know, but in those days, I was asked why you didn't report that, or why you wouldn't report a rape or whatever. It's like if you were reported back then, the question was, what did you do? What were you
Hmm.
wearing? What did you say? Were you being too sassy? That was always my favorite, being too sassy, which was kind of my mark and trade. And now I thought that had gone away, but this woman who was dealing with this sexual harassment in the workplace said that she had gone to HR and she was almost asked the same thing. So, what did you do to say to him? Did you say no to him? Did you do this? Did you do that? So, one of the things that came out was that when you are sexually harassed, you make it a very loud no, even if you have to do it in public. And that will take care of most of the problems. Not that he will stop necessarily, but that you have now made it clear. And I think women are afraid to make it clear. And that's partly because, as Margaret Atwood said, men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid men will kill them. So part of the fears that come out and the safety issues that come out is true. You may get physically harmed, and so it keeps you smaller than you want to be. It keeps you encapsulated. It keeps you fearful. And I think that's a lot of what happened. And I actually think part of the reason I got married so young was because I was wanting to be safe.
Hmm.
So little did I know
I
I'm an
th-
oceanographer and I was never home, so I wasn't that safe.
And it's, it's very clear from the story that you're telling about that time when he was out in the ocean doing whatever he's doing or not doing for that matter, and how you created your own community and how that then translated throughout the book until you where you're now. He's gone, you have a new, much more loving, understanding person in your life that you just married, as I found out. And you changed, you turned things around for yourself. But you also, like you said, you were a tomboy. You were going out there, you're going after it. You're not going to take it lying down, as I would phrase it. You're like, okay, I'm going to go. But for the woman that is looking to emulate you, or they will all learn from your book, I know that. But then they say, what do I do? How do I give myself permission to do all these things that I desire to do, that I crave? And again, women in midlife, we have desires, we have needs. We're changing as we're going. I think every 10 years, our orbit changes a little bit with the desires and the needs we have. Is how do we do this without guilt, fear, and apologizing?
I think the first thing probably would be to really set yourself down and what brings you joy. Because
Yeah.
what's missing in our lives, I mean, we have very this capitalist society is very production oriented. If you're not productive, you're not a real person, and everything is geared towards work, 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 study, 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 make money. But what is constantly missing is companionship, intimacy, connected in connections, and that plain passionate joy. And joy, it doesn't have to simply be sexuality. It can also be in anything you do. I think one of the reasons the dating apps don't work very well is that's missing that piece. Whereas people I know who have done fairly well in dating have gone through the meetups where you're hiking because other people like to hike, or you're doing something that other people like to do. And so you're in a group of people who, if nothing else, they could become your friends. And I have another woman who's she's my hero because she's in her 73. She just got married again. She had a very difficult marriage. And the way she approached dating at the age of 70 was that these were men were by and large nice guys, and that she was just maybe meeting friends, which was fine for her. She wasn't looking necessarily to find like I think women get entangled in the knight in shining armor and finding that perfect man and, or the one, I'm like, and I always say the one for now. So,
True.
yeah, my husband doesn't like that answer though.
That's okay.
We have a freedom. It's okay.
And so that's true, a community, create a community with male, female, whatever your preference is. Any of the listeners, we don't know what your sexual preference is, but it doesn't matter. It goes for all of us that are listening in midlife to that podcast, that we can, follow the desires, and we don't have to feel guilty about that. It doesn't have to be what I always say, what I always hear is like, oh my God, he was so dangerous. And that's like, yeah, red flag right there. Dangerous, not good. But how do we approach this whole topic without apologizing? Because women apologize every freaking time about everything. You tell us, Sue.
I'm not sure what the answer is then. I mean, if that's for someone else, for myself, it's just, authenticity, being honest with yourself, I make mistakes. I'm going to make more mistakes. I just want to make sure I make new mistakes, not old mistakes. And I think the fear of failing is what a lot of people face. And I would say if you don't fail, you can possibly ever succeed in anything in life. It's actually an impossibility. So go out there, have fun, and fail away.
There you go. Couldn't have said it better. But before we close this topic, I want to ask you um, the SPARK framework is strategy, purpose, authenticity, resilience, and knowledgeable. What is one of those tips that you can give our listeners that are around the SPARK framework? Pick either strategic, purposeful, authentic, resilience, or knowledgeable.
I'll pick authentic because I think as a memoir writer, I would like to see everyone have a voice to tell their story. I don't care if it's telling it into a little audio tape telling a friend, a child, a grandchild who probably is going to be bored, but you can still tell it. I think we all have a voice. I think that voice helps you understand who you were and why you were on Earth, and that yes, you can live your life as you wish and help others to live their life. You give them some strength to overcome all those double standards and anything that's holding them back by living your life. And I think, particularly even for your older, living your life as authentically as possible is the best thing you can do for not just yourself, but almost everyone around you. And it makes your kids happy too, because she's taken care of. I don't have to worry about her.
Well, that's a different topic, right? Now, Sue, what are you most excited about right now?
Um, I'm excited about, I love doing the podcast. I'm having wonderful conversations with people that almost all women, but just absolutely amazing. And I think most of them are defying those ageist stereotypes. I think I'm meeting a lot of people who are over the age of 50, 60, 70 who are are really challenging the way we look at age in the society. And that is really exciting to me. And I'm also writing a rom-com. I started to write a second memoir, but it was too depressing. Actually, 60 pages I threw away. So now I'm writing a romantic comedy about a 50-year-old woman who's just left a bad marriage and she's divorced. And her friend has challenged her to do 20 dates in 20 days with 20 different men. And of course, the first thing she does, being practical, is to do speed dating to try and get it out of the way. And during all this, she runs into the old lover that she swore she'd never see or talk to again.
Don't tell anybody else, because we're
Not
don't tell
that
more. Don't tell more.
Yeah, so I decided to write something that would make people laugh instead of cry.
A good plan. Sue, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all the goodness about your book and a little bit behind the scenes through the lens of your book and your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Heike.